Karl Malone spent years building one of basketball's greatest careers, but after his past was exposed, the conversation around him changed forever. At 63, every public appearance reignites the same controversy, and the life he's living today is far different from the one many expected. Let me break it down. In 1983, Karl Malone was 20 years old, playing basketball at Louisiana Tech, a rising star with NBA scouts already circling. In 1983, when Gloria was only 13 and an 8th grade student, she became pregnant with Belle after a relationship with Karl Malone. Gloria wasn't a stranger from another town. She was a neighbor and family acquaintance of the Malone family. They lived in Summerfield, Louisiana, a town so small that everybody basically knew everybody. That single fact, the size of the town, the closeness of the families, would end up shaping everything that came after. Although Malone was 20 years old at the time that the then 13-year-old Gloria Belle was impregnated, she said that her family chose not to pursue criminal charges against Malone over the relationship. According to Belle, with Malone being a neighbor, Summerfield's population is only a few hundred. Her family did not wish to see him jailed. No arrest, no trial, no headline in 1983. Just a baby, born the following May, and a young man who was about to become one of the most famous athletes in the country. His name was Demetrius, and for years, Malone wanted nothing to do with him. The Bell family didn't let it go quietly, though. Once Malone had made it to the NBA and the money started rolling in, Gloria's parents took action. The Salt Lake Tribune reported that when Bell's grandparents initially took Malone to court for paternity in 1986. His second year with the Jazz, they requested Malone pay $200 a week. Malone didn't respond to the suit, but a Louisiana judge ruled he was Bell's father after a paternity test showed that was indeed accurate, and ordered Malone to pay $125 a week, plus past and future medical expenses. He still didn't show up for his son. Laboratory blood tests prepared for the Bell family's 1996 paternity lawsuit against Karl Malone reportedly pointed to an over 99% probability that Bell's father was either Malone or a twin brother of Malone. Malone initially refused to respond to the lawsuit, but eventually reached an out-of-court settlement with the Bell family over the issue. Even then, there was no admission wrapped in the settlement. The Bells received a single lump sum payment of a confidential amount, with no ongoing child support for Demetrius. In speaking later about the settlement, Malone's attorney asserted that it had not included an official court determination of paternity and noted that Malone had a lot of brothers. A grown man, at the height of his NBA fame, was letting his lawyer suggest in public that maybe one of his brothers had fathered the child instead. Meanwhile, Demetrius grew up not even knowing his father's real story. In 2008, a newspaper reported that Demetrius did not know who his father was until after high school. Now stack that timeline next to Malone's basketball career, because the two ran in parallel the entire time. While the paternity suit crawled through Louisiana courts, Malone was becoming the mailman, an MVP, a two-time gold medalist, a member of the Dream Team, one half of the greatest pick-and-roll combination the league has ever seen with John Stockton. The NBA was building him into a legend. At the exact same moment, he was refusing to acknowledge the child he'd fathered with a middle schooler. That contrast is the whole story. It's why, decades later, this keeps resurfacing every single time the league tries to celebrate him. Kendrick Lamar brought it back into the mainstream in a way nobody expected. The case was also given another spotlight when Kendrick Lamar referenced his teammate John Stockton to draw a parallel between Drake and Karl Malone on Not Like Us. Suddenly, a diss track aimed at another rapper had millions of young listeners Googling Karl Malone's name for the first time and finding out exactly what happened in Summerfield in 1983. Then there's Patrick Beverley, a current generation NBA voice with his own podcast, getting blindsided live on air by his own co-host. On an episode of his eponymous podcast, Patrick Beverley was left shocked when his co-host Adam Ferrone informed him about former NBA star Karl Malone's history with a 13-year-old girl. At around the 1 hour 15-minute mark of the latest episode of the Pat Bev podcast with Roan, the two hosts were discussing their lineup for the best team of all time. When Ferrone asked Beverley how he feels about Karl Malone being included on a team like this, Beverley, a guy who spent his whole career around the league, admitted flatly that he didn't know the details. Once he did, the tone of that conversation changed instantly. ESPN's Bomani Jones went further and didn't bother softening it. He'd already disliked Malone's on-court style, the elbows, the dirty play reputation, long before he learned the rest. And then, we found out the whole thing. If you don't know this, that when he was in college, Karl Malone had a baby with a 13-year-old. Jones pointed out something that cuts right to the heart of why this story never dies. Malone has simply never had to answer for it in any real, sustained way, largely because he disappeared from public life for years at a stretch. There's never been any sort of reckoning for Malone because Malone lays low. Like he's just out there in the country, driving his semi, doing whatever it is Karl Malone does out there. That's three separate voices: a podcast host learning it live, a rapper embedding it into a chart-topping song, and a national sports commentator calling out the league directly, all converging on the same uncomfortable fact that Karl Malone has carried since he was 20 years old. And every time the NBA tries to bring him back into the spotlight for a nostalgia moment, this is the story that resurfaces instead. To understand how sad Malone's life has become at 63, you have to understand what he built by walking away from, and who paid the price for that decision. Demetress Bell wasn't given the easy version of childhood. Gloria raised Demetress largely on her own, as Malone initially denied paternity and had little involvement in Bell's upbringing. No child support checks arriving reliably, no father showing up to games, just a single mother in a tiny Louisiana town, raising a son whose biological father happened to be turning into one of the richest athletes in America. Bell didn't even grow up playing the sport that would eventually define him. When he was younger, Demetress played softball. He did not play organized football. In high school, he started playing basketball. He was good enough to earn a scholarship. This scholarship was to Northwestern State University. He found his way into football almost by accident, without the benefit of a famous father's connections or money opening any doors for him. By the time he was a grown man himself, drafted into the NFL, Bell had learned the details of exactly who his father was and exactly what had happened when his mother was 13. He didn't get to grow up in ignorance forever. The young Bell didn't even know who his father was until he dropped out of high school. When father and son finally did meet, it wasn't the reunion people might expect. When Demetress Bell made the remark, he was an NFL offensive lineman who had been drafted by the Buffalo Bills in 2008. He met Karl Malone that year and was reportedly told that it was too late for any father-son relationship to start. Think about that for a second. A father, worth over $100 million by then, looked at his adult son and told him it was simply too late. Not an apology, not an attempt to make up for lost time, just a door closing permanently from the man who'd opened it in the first place. Bell's response to that rejection has become one of the most quietly devastating parts of this whole story. Speaking to ESPN's Jemele Hill in 2008, he described his relationship with his absent father in the coldest terms imaginable. "I treat it as if my mother went to the sperm bank. I don't hate him for not being in my life. It made me a better person." That's not forgiveness. That's a young man building emotional armor. Because the alternative, actually hoping for a father who wasn't coming, was too painful to sustain. He said it himself, plainly, without asking for sympathy. "I grew up around good people," Bell said. "I never turned to a father figure. I was lucky. I didn't need one. I'm happy." And here's the detail that makes Malone's absence sting even more. It was never about money. He had plenty. It would be one thing if Malone was unable to financially provide for his son, but he made more than $100 million during his NBA career. This wasn't a struggling man who couldn't afford to help. This was one of the wealthiest athletes of his era, choosing silence and distance over a relationship with his own child for the better part of 3 decades. Years later, something did shift. Not a dramatic reconciliation splashed across headlines, but a slow thaw that outside observers only caught glimpses of. The two didn't have a relationship until 2014 when the pair met for the first time, but they began to reconcile and have been in regular contact with each other since 2018, per the Deseret News. By the time Malone's statue went up at Louisiana Tech, Demetress was standing right there with the rest of the family. Malone initially denied paternity but has since reconciled with his son, Demetress Bell, himself a former professional athlete who played 5 seasons in the NFL. Bell, alongside Malone's 6 other children, appeared at his side at the ceremony, according to the Advocate. But reconciliation doesn't erase what came before it. It doesn't erase the mother who raised a son alone in a town of a few hundred people, while the boy's biological father built car dealerships and timber empires. It doesn't erase the years Demetress spent believing his own explanation, that he might as well have been conceived at a sperm bank, because it was easier than hoping for something that wasn't coming. That's the human cost sitting underneath every headline about Malone's statues and speaking fees. A woman who was 13 when her life changed forever, and a son who had to build his identity around the absence of the man who caused it. By the time Louisiana Tech decided to honor Malone permanently in bronze on its own campus, you'd think someone would have paused to think about how that would land. They didn't. Or if they did, they decided it wouldn't matter. The unveiling itself looked like any other celebration of an athletic legend. Salt Lake City, Utah Jazz legend Karl Malone was honored with a new statue, unveiled at his alma mater Louisiana Tech on Thursday. Malone, along with Louisiana Tech legends Terry Bradshaw, Fred Dean, Kim Mulkey, Willie Roaf, and Teresa Weatherspoon, were each honored with a statue in the Sarah and A.L. Williams Champions Plaza. 6 bronze figures, standing together as a monument to the university's greatest athletes. The superstar power forward was joined by his 7 children and their families at the ceremony where Malone's statue was revealed. Malone leaned into the family man image hard that night. "I live every day for my family," Malone said according to Reed Darcy of NOLA.com. "And I'll fight for my family till the death. That's what I believe in." It didn't take long for the backlash to catch up with the bronze. A history professor at the very university that had just erected the statue said the quiet part out loud. And it spread fast. "I wonder what message the university believes it sends to our students when it installs a statue on our campus of a wealthy and famous man who sexually abused a minor when he was a star athlete." History professor Drew McKevitt said he wasn't the only university voice raising the alarm. A state representative weighed in too, framing it in terms that were hard to argue with. "Honoring someone as an athletic hero," Freeman said, "when that person knowingly used their fame and status to take advantage of a child is always wrong." Even the man who sculpted the statue got dragged into the controversy. He'd claimed due diligence had been done before he ever picked up a chisel. Brian Hanlon, the artist who created the statue, said he tasks his attorney with digging deep into the background of his subjects, and the lawyer found no evidence of Malone's sexual misconduct. A quick search would have told a very different story, one that was published, on the record, in Louisiana newspapers decades earlier. The controversy resurfaced with new intensity years after the statue first went up, when a broader wave of scrutiny around college athletics and past sexual misconduct swept through American sports media again. Fans openly started calling for the statue's removal, both at Louisiana Tech and at Malone's other monument with the Utah Jazz. One broadcaster's public reaction summed up how absurd the ongoing celebration looked to a lot of people. P.S. Parents seem to fear a whole lot of explaining. Isn't that the gig? Can't imagine how parents are handling the world these days, Michelle Beadle wrote. Other fans zeroed in on how the league itself had handled Malone's return to the spotlight. The NBA, which dedicated part of the 2023 All-Star Game to Karl Malone and had him come out and take photos with LeBron and Kareem, doesn't want kids to be asking uncomfortable questions during their games, one fan added. Malone himself has never engaged with any of it in a meaningful way. When reporters have pressed him directly, he's shut the conversation down, almost instantly, every time, with nearly identical language, when Malone was asked about his past by the Salt Lake Tribune. During festivities around the 2023 NBA All-Star Game in Salt Lake City, Utah, he was less than diplomatic. "I'm not discussing any of that. I don't care," Malone said. "That's my life. It's my personal life, and I'll deal with that, like I've had to deal with everything." That's been his answer for over 2 decades now. Not a defense, not an explanation, just a wall going up every time. And it's part of why the story keeps resurfacing instead of fading. A man who built a public brand around toughness and family loyalty has never once, in public, sat down and reckoned with the 13-year-old girl whose life he altered when he was 20. The Rolling Stone piece that ran during the 2023 controversy zeroed in on that exact silence, and it's brutal in its framing. Malone has never so much as publicly acknowledged Gloria or Demetrius, probably because the explanation for having sex with a 13-year-old would be even more complicated than his decision to abandon them. So there he stands, literally in bronze at 2 separate institutions, a monument built to a career, with the human cost of that career carved out of the plaque underneath it. While the statues gathered controversy, Malone kept building something else entirely. A business empire that on paper looks like the American dream. It's worth understanding what that empire actually is, because it explains a lot about how he spent his 60s. He's not living off nostalgia tours and old highlight reels. Today, Karl Malone continues to deliver as a successful entrepreneur, with vast empire of multi-million-dollar business interests in the automotive industry, timber, real estate, and restaurants. Forbes estimates his net worth at more than $100 million. Car dealerships stretch across state lines now. The Karl Malone Auto Group now manages both the Teague Toyota Chevrolet and Ford Lincoln dealerships in Arkansas alone, one piece of a much larger network. And true to the reporting from people who've spent time around him, he never actually left trucking behind despite an early business failure in the 90s. Karl Malone is bagging his fledgling trucking business, putting a half-dozen tractor-trailers on the auction block in early October. The 18-month-old company, Malone Enterprises Trucking, Inc., suffered during its short history from personnel woes and financial difficulties. That first venture folded, but decades later, he came back to it, not as an investor watching from a distance, but literally behind the wheel. What we do know is Karl Malone is still a truck driver. Yes, NBA legend Karl Malone was indeed a truck driver. He loves trucking, says an associate at a Louisiana timberland property he owns. There's something almost strange about picturing one of the most dominant power forwards in NBA history, a two-time MVP, physically hauling freight through rural Louisiana in his 60s while sitting on a $100 million net worth. But those who know him say it's not about the money at all. He likes trucking much so that he routinely does deliveries for his companies. Talk about getting your hands dirty. The mailman likes to deliver, quite literally. It fits a pattern that's defined his entire post-retirement life, staying physically isolated, doing manual labor on land he owns, far away from cameras and press conferences. One report put it plainly when discussing why he avoids the spotlight. Around events tied to his history, the reasons for staying off the grid are many, one of which is the Gloria Bell and Demetrius Bell saga, a story he likes to avoid, and one that can bring more painful information to light. Even his public speaking bio, the version his own agency puts out to book him for corporate events, leans hard into an image of discipline and self-improvement that stands in stark contrast to how he handled his own son for decades. His conditioning and exercise regimen was famous throughout the NBA, and today he still maintains a vigorous exercise regimen that would shame athletes half his age. He remains in the best shape of his life. It's not uncommon for Karl to do 500 to 1,000 sit-ups per day. The same bio talks about charity work, about supporting troops overseas, about disaster relief. This was witnessed in 2005, when he led a convoy of trucks and equipment to help victims clean up the damage left in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. All of it true. All of it part of a carefully built public image that has coexisted uneasily with a past he refuses to discuss on the record. It raises an uncomfortable question that follows him at 63. How does a man build a $100 million empire, drive trucks through the same rural Louisiana roads he grew up on, donate to hurricane victims and troops overseas while never once publicly reckoning with the girl whose adolescence he ended? The empire isn't the sad part. The silence sitting underneath it is. Even his allies in the buying up land department haven't escaped scrutiny. Locals in the areas where he's expanded his timber holdings have raised eyebrows at how aggressively he's grown that side of the business, separate entirely from basketball, separate from the dealerships, quietly becoming one of the biggest private landowners in parts of rural Louisiana. It's a business story that would be unremarkable for almost anyone else. For Malone, it's just one more layer of a man who has spent 30 years building outward while never turning back to face what happened when he was 20. So where does that leave him now? At 63 years old, decades removed from the Delta Center crowds chanting his name. Physically, by every account, he's fine. The workouts haven't stopped. The businesses keep expanding. The land keeps accumulating. He shows up at family events, statue unveilings, the occasional all-star weekend when the league wants a dream team reunion photo. On the surface, it looks like a man who's landed on his feet in every possible way. But look closer at what actually surrounds him. A son who spent his childhood believing his father might as well have been a stranger from a sperm bank. A mother who was pressured by circumstance and small-town proximity into never pursuing charges against the man who impregnated her at 13. Two separate bronze statues that have become lightning rods every single time a professor, a journalist, or a fan base decides to look up his history, instead of just admiring the dunk frozen mid-air. A rapper's diss track that permanently linked his name to a very different kind. of legacy for an entirely new generation of listeners who'd never even watched him play. Every attempt to bring Malone back into basketball's warm nostalgia, the All-Star cameos, the Dream Team reunions, the statue ceremonies, ends up reopening the same wound instead of letting it heal. That's not because people won't let it go. It's because he's never given them a reason to. For years, he refused to acknowledge paternity. And even now, decades later, "I don't care" remains the closest thing to a public statement he's ever offered. The reconciliation with Demetrius is real, and it matters. The two are reportedly close now, present at family functions, past the coldest years of their estrangement. That's not nothing. A father and son found their way to something, resembling a relationship however late it came. But it happened on Malone's terms, decades after the fact, only once his son had already built an entire identity around not needing him. Gloria Bell, the woman at the center of all of it, has mostly stayed out of the spotlight entirely. She raised her son. She watched him become a professional athlete in his own right. She's never sought the kind of public reckoning that so many others have demanded on her behalf. Whatever peace she's found it quietly, away from the cameras that keep circling back to Malone every few years. And that might be the saddest part of all. The man at the center of the story gets to control the terms of every conversation about it. When he'll show up, what he'll say, how much he'll engage. He's the one with the businesses, the statues, the net worth, the platform. The people most affected by what happened in 1983 have had far less say in how this story gets told, retold, and monetized. Every time it resurfaces in a song, a podcast, or a controversy over a bronze figure on a college campus. At 63, Karl Malone has built almost everything a man could want materially. What he hasn't built in over 40 years is an honest reckoning with the 13-year-old girl whose life changed the moment she met him, and the son who spent decades wondering why his father wasn't there. That absence, more than any statue or dealership or timber deal, is what actually defines where he stands today.